So is a granny flat a good investment? My name is Colin Fragar from Council Approval Group. So some of you are probably looking at whether a granny flat is the right thing for you. And I want to give you some 5 key points for you to be able to analyze your deal to see if it's going to be worth the effort to build this granny flat, whether it's an investment property or on your own family property. So first question that I would ask you is the approval process. How is the approval process going to be? And it's really important that you get the right advice up front with this granny flat. The last thing you want to do, yes, it might be a cheaper cost of construction for a granny flat than a large house. However, I don't want you to go down a path of literally years of frustration if you get this wrong. Just by going to somebody who does plans, a drafter, just because they can draft plans doesn't mean that the approval process will go smoothly, or even if you can get the approval itself. Highly recommend, if you haven't already, please grab your ultimate guide in achieving council approval. So this magazine was specifically designed for yourself. It does a whole bunch of tips and tricks on the council approval process. You can get that from our website, councilapproval.com.au. So the first question to ask, is it a good investment? It's kind of a different sort of a question. It's not a financial question, but it is a very important question. And that is how is the approval process going to be for you and your family? And I highly recommend that you talk to one of our team if you haven't already. Okay, the second thing that I would like to ask you to ask yourself of whether it's a good investment is the capital investment required. Now, a lot of people think, okay, I've heard that a granny flat builder can get me an $80,000, $100,000, $120,000 granny flat. And in effect, they shoot themselves in the foot, because what they end up doing is reducing 2 things. First of all, they reduce the capital value improvement, so the end value of the property. So when you finish the granny flat, how much is the property worth? If you do a really cheap build, the value is not going to value it much more than what it's already worth. Second thing that you shoot yourself in the foot with is the actual rent return that you will receive. And my experience has been, in having done thousands of these for clients, but particularly I've done a few of them for myself, is that if you spend that little bit more, maybe an extra $50,000 on the build, you get a really nice really nice secondary dwelling that you're proud of, and it actually rents for more and it adds more value. So don't go too low in terms of the cost of construction. Give yourself a little bit, whether you have to borrow a little bit, have to pull out some equity from your property, whatever the solution is. Okay, the third one is to look at the yield. So, of course, the rent return. Now, when you're looking at the yield, it's really important that you don't factor in 52 weeks of rent. I usually do an equation of 48 or 50 weeks because you'll probably have some vacancy with these. The second thing is don't calculate on gross rent, calculate on net rent. By that, I mean make sure you take out the managing agent's commission of around 7.7%. The last thing that I would ask you to look at is to look at the insurance cost. One advantage of having a granny flat is that the insurance doesn't go up proportionally by the amount of extra capital value that you've put in there, the amount of construction costs. It's not a proportionate cost. So usually the other ancillary costs aren't as high for a granny flat as some other investments, like you're not paying strata fees, for example. Okay, the fourth one is to look at what your financing options are. Is it a good investment? You've of course got to factor in whether you're pulling in personal money that's just sitting in your bank account. Are you bringing in an investor? Are you doing a joint venture? Or are you going to be able to access a building construction loan? I've done a few of these now myself, and my 2 favorite paths to do it is one, to be able to pull out equity from the property to be able to build, so I don't have to put any of my own cash in. The second option for you that is available is to get is to be able to get a building loan. So you're not actually accessing the equity within the property. You're actually it's a completely separate loan. You're getting 100% loan of the build cost. So, for example, if you have a $150,000 granny flat, you're borrowing an extra $150,000, which is a construction loan, and that's actually my favorite way to be able to pull off these. Okay, number 5 is to look at the capital value. Now, it's really hard, I've found, to work out what's the end valuation going to be once you finish the granny flat, because usually there's not much comparable sales data. However, you can probably do a rudimentary calculation. At the very least, hopefully it's going to add at least the cost of the construction. But you're probably going to be looking at a broader, maybe 12-month period to see comparable sales, look at a broader area to be able to see what they're worth. And you'll probably be pleasantly surprised at the amount of capital value that it adds. It's no secret that a granny flat does add significant value, both in a rent yield, but also does add value in terms of capital growth and the valuation of the property. Okay, hopefully that's been helpful. If you haven't already, please talk to one of our consultants at Council Approval Group. Please book in for your free 30-minute consultation. They'll be able to run through with you the property you have in mind, what the best path of approval is, plus some of the things that I've talked about today. Thank you for joining us, and I wish you every success.